Page 46, a brief account of what I did about the first man who was after me. Oh, this sounds exciting. At the edge of the meadow, I sensed all was not well at camp. How I knew there was a human being there was not clear to me then. I can only say that after living so long with birds and animals, the movement of a human is like the difference between the explosion of a cap pistol and a cannon. I wormed toward camp. When I could see the man I felt to be there, I stopped and looked. He was wearing a forester's uniform. Immediately, I thought they had sent someone out to bring me in, and I began to shake. Then I realized that I didn't have to go back to meet the man at all. I was perfectly free and capable of settling down anywhere. My tree was just a pleasant habit. I circled the meadow and went over to the gorge. On the way, I checked a trap. It was a deadfall, a figure 4 under a big rock. The rock was down. The food was rabbit. I picked a comfortable place just below the rim of the gorge where I could pop up every now and then and watch my tree. Here, I dressed down the rabbit and fed Frightful some of the more savory bites from a young falcon's point of view, the liver, the heart, and the brain. Okay, the bird liked those parts. She ate in gulps, and I watched her swallow, and I sensed a great pleasure. It is hard to explain my feelings at that moment. It seemed marvelous to see life pump through that strange little body of feathers, wordless noises, milk eyes, much as life pumped through me. The food put the bird to sleep. I watched her eyelids close from the bottom up and her head quiver. The fuzzy body rocked, the tail spread to steady it, and the little duck hawk almost sighed as she sang into the leaves sleeping. I had lots of time. I was going to wait for the man to leave, so I stared at my bird, the beautiful details of her new feathers, the fern-like lashes along the lids, the saucy bristles at the base of the beak. Pleasant hours passed. Frightful would awaken. I would feed her. She would fall back to sleep, and I would watch the breath rock her body ever so slightly. I was breathing the same way, only not as fast. Her heart beat much faster than mine. She was designed to her bones for a swifter life. It finally occurred to me that I was very hungry. I stood up to see if the man was gone. He was yawning and pacing. The sun was slanting on him now, and I could see him quite well. He was a fire warden. Of course, it had not rained, I told myself, for almost 3 weeks, and the fire planes have been circling the mountains and the valleys, patrolling the mountains. Apparently, the smoke from where my fire was spotted, and a man was sent to check it. I recalled the bare, trampled ground around the tree, the fireplace of rocks filled with ashes, the wood chips from the making of my bed, and resolved hereafter to keep my yard clean. So he's thinking, every time I start a fire, I have to make sure I clean up after myself, because they're probably in a fire ban right now because of the lack of rain. So I made rabbit soup in a tin can I found at the bottom of the gorge. I seasoned it with wild garlic and jack-in-the-pulpit roots. Jack-in-the-pulpits have 3 big leaves on a stalk, and they are easily recognized by curly striped awning above a stiff, serious preacher named Jack. The jack-in-the-pulpit root, or corm, tastes and looks like potato. It should never be eaten raw. The fire I made was only of the driest wood, and I made it right at the water's edge. I didn't want a smoky fire on this particular evening. After supper, I made a bough bed and stretched out with Frightful beside me. Apparently, the more you stroke and handle a falcon, the easier they are to train. I had all sorts of plans for hoods and jesses as the straps on a falcon are called, and I soon forgot about the man. Stretched on boughs, I listened to the wood pewees calling their haunting good nights until I fell sound asleep, in which I learned to season my food. The fire warden made a fire sometime in the colder hours of the night. At dawn, he was asleep beside white, smoldering ashes. I crawled back to the gorge, fed Frightful rabbit bites, and slipped back to the edge of the meadow to check a box trap that I had set the day before. I made it by tying small sticks together like a log cabin. This trap was better than the snares or the deadfalls. It had caught numerous rabbits, several squirrels, and a groundhog. I saw as I inched toward that it was closed. The sight of a closed trap excites me to this day. I still can't believe that animals don't understand why delicious food is in such a ridiculous spot. Well, this morning I pulled the trap deep into the woods to open it. The trapped animal was light. I couldn't guess what it was. It was also active, flipping and darting from one corner to the next. I peeked in to locate it, so that I could grab it quickly behind the head without getting bitten. I was not always successful at this, and I had scars to prove it. I put my eye into the crack. A rumpus arose in the darkness. 2 bright eyes shone out, and through the hole that was no wider than a string bean came a weasel. He flew right out at me. He landed on my shoulder, gave me a lecture that I shall never forget, and vanished under the scant cover of trillium and blood-red leaves. He popped up about 5 feet away, stood on his hind feet to lecture me again, and I said, "Scat!" So he darted right to my knee, put his broad furry paws on my pants, and looked me in the face. I shall never forget the fear and wonder I felt at the bravery of that weasel. He stood his ground, and he berated me. That means he yelled. He kind of lectured and yelled at Sam in weasel language. I could see by his flashing of his eyes and the curl of his lip that he was furious at me for trapping him. He couldn't talk, but I knew what he meant. Wonder filled me as I realized he was absolutely unafraid. No other animal, and I knew quite a few by now, had been so brave in my presence. Screaming, he jumped on me. This surprised me and scared me. He leapt from my lap to my head. He took a mouthful of my hair and wrestled it. My goosebumps rose. I was too frightened to move. A good thing, too, because I guess he figured I was not going to fight back. And his scream of anger changed to a purr of peace. Still, I couldn't move. Presently, down he climbed, as stately as royalty, and off he marched, never looking back. He sank beneath the leaves like a fish beneath the water, not a stem rippled to mark his way. And so, the Baron and I met for the first time, and it was the beginning of a harassing but wonderful friendship. Frightful had been watching all this. She was tense with fright. Although young and inexperienced, she knew an enemy when she saw one. I picked her up and whispered into her birdie-smelling neck feathers, "You wild ones know." Since I couldn't go home, I decided to spend the day in the marsh down the west side of the mountain. There were a lot of cattails and frogs there. Frightful balanced on my fist as we walked. She had learned that in a short span of one afternoon and a night, she is a very bright bird. On our way, we scared up a deer. It was a doe. I watched her dart gracefully away and said to Frightful, "That's what I want. I need a door for my house, tethers for you, and a blanket for me. How am I going to get that deer," right? So he's going to not only save the meat from that deer, but skin it and use its skin for different things. This was not the first time I said this. The forest was full of deer, and I already had drawn plans on a piece of birch bark for deadfalls, pit traps, and snares, and none seemed workable. The day passed. In the early evening, we stole home tree by tree to find that the warden had gone. I cleaned up my front yard, scattered needles over the bare spots, and started a small fire with some very dry wood that would not smoke much. No more worms for me. I liked my tree, and although I could live somewhere else, I certainly did not want to. Once home, I immediately started to work again. I had a device I wanted to try, and I put some hickory sticks in a tin can and set it to boiling while I fixed dinner. Before going to bed, I noted this on a piece of birch bark. Okay, he's taking notes again. This night, I am making salt. I know that people in the early days got along without it, but I think some of these wild foods would taste better with some flavoring. I understand that hickory sticks, boiled dry, leave a salty residue. I am trying it. And in the morning I added, "It is quite true, the can is dry and thick with a black substance. It is very salty, and I tried it on frog's legs for breakfast. It is just what I have needed." So he just made his own salt. That's pretty cool. And so I went into salt production for several days, and I chipped out a niche inside the tree to which to store it. June 19th. I finished my bed today. The ash slats work very well, and they are quite springy and comfortable. The bed just fits in the right-hand side of the tree. I have hemlock boughs on it now, but hope to have a deer hide soon. I am making a figure 4 trap as tall as me with a log on it that I can barely lift. If it doesn't look workable, I wish there was another way of getting a deer. June 20th. I decided today to dig a pit to trap a deer, so I am whittling a shovel out of a board I found in the stream this morning. That stream is very useful. It has given me tin cans for pots and now an oaken board for a shovel. Oh, that's how he formed his shovel. He found a board in the stream. Frightful will hop from the stump to my fist. She still can't fly. Her wing feathers are only about an inch long. I think she likes me.